Welcome everybody. Thanks for having me. Been doing this now for 50 years. And started right out of high school, 1972.
Wow, you're old.
Do the math. So anyway, I want to start in about the mid-60s. And in the mid-60s, a gentleman by the name of Gordon Holcomb had a company in Redwood City, California. And his company, they were building survival boats, safety boats, escape slides for airlines, and then yellow horse collar life vests. You see, you get a review on how to use it every time you get on a plane. And so Gordon had, his claim to fame was that the chemical light stick cyanamide, he did not invent the chemical, but he invented the encapsulation source for it. The glass tube that held one chemical, and then the plastic tube that held the other, and then when you bent it and broke it and shook it, and you mixed both of them, then it glowed green. Well, that chemical light stick went on every one of those yellow life vests. And so that's a piece that he had. He was making some decent money off that. And he was trying to market that in a bunch of other ways, but that was one area in the airlines that he had made that work. That was a great piece, and that went on for a lot of time. He eventually hooked up with another bigger company called Switlick that they were much bigger and partnered with him to make these yellow life vests. But the problem was they were little by little forcing him out, taking it away from him. And so eventually he was left with nothing except for his chemical light stick. And so he had played around with the slides and the survival boats and stuff like that. So he came up with an idea of how to build a slide that once everybody slid off it, the last person could pull the pin, that thing would drop down, and that became the survival boat, the rescue boat. And ultra thin fabric, a real lightweight neoprene, but very, very durable, ripstop material. But anyway, come along to 1972, he partners up with a couple other gentlemen, Dick Ford and Chris Pearson. And Chris Pearson was in the airline business. He was in sales. He sold airline tires. And then Dick Ford, his family had been helping finance a few of Gordon Holcomb's projects. So they were joining together to form a new business. And they came together and they were looking for a place to rent to start their business. And my dad happened to be managing a electrical company in San Leandro, California. That company had a few bays that they weren't using. So somewhere or other they hooked up and they rented those 2 bays. Well, in them conversations with my father, they said, hey, my dad asked, hey, you gonna be hiring anybody? And they said, sure. So he said, hey, I'll send my son down and see if he's interested. So I went down there, and I had always been a worker. I had always had jobs and stuff, but there was a little point there where I wasn't, and I went down to check it out, and we talked for a little bit, and there was nothing in that shop, and they said, when would you be able to start? And I said, I could start any time. And they said, grab a broom. And so there was my beginning of being involved with Maravia. And at that point, it still didn't even have a name. And so we weren't even sure what we were actually going to be building. And so one of the products was we were building these little lightweight survival boats. And these escape slides are slides for, you know, you would come off an airplane if it crashed in the ocean or something. So we had been working on them quite a bit. And a great story with Gordon Holcomb. He was an incredible inventor. He could build almost anything and wasn't afraid to take it on. But he wasn't the greatest of businessmen, and so that's where Dick Ford came on, and he was going to be the administrator of the company. Chris Pearson was going to be our sales manager. Gordon was going to teach me how, I was going to be basically his grunt, gluing and helping him cut all this out and trying to figure out how to make this stuff. And so we built a few of these slides, and they were way cool and big, and they could package up very small. So Gordon had set up this deal to take it down to Southern California and show it off to military and the airline industry. We went down there, Gordon and myself, and we get down there, and they had built this plywood fuselage up in the rafters in this big building. You know how high a wing on an airplane is. It's pretty high up there. It's like being up in the ceiling in this thing. And so we have these little steps we could get up there, and we worked on that thing for a couple hours, getting it all set up, and it was all packaged up. And by then, all these other folks were showing up. So the idea was Gordon was going to deploy the slide, and then he was going to jump out and jump on it and slide down. Well, it had all worked very, very well before, and so we got it all set up, and me and her up there. I'm pretty nervous, you know, making sure we had everything ready, and he did the last check over of what he wanted, and everybody was down there, and somebody gave the word go, and Gordon pulled the pin, these big giant CO2 cartridges. The slide came out perfect. It dropped down to the ground, and Gordon jumped out there feet first and landed on his back on it and was coming down that slide, except for he forgot to put the pin in where it was attached at the top. So at 60 years old plus, that whole thing's fallen, and he's no longer sliding down it, he's now riding it down, and it hits the ground, and it bounces them back up every bit as high as it was up there. And the next one on the way down, he wasn't going to land on it. So he hit the cement, and he got broken up pretty good, and everybody's sitting there in shock, and it was pretty terrible looking, and he was hurt pretty good. And I knew there was a few broken bones, but as they were loading him on an ambulance, he looked at me and he said, "Roll it up. We've done it a million times. Take it back up there. Make sure you put that pin. You're going to be the guy jumping." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm not jumping off that thing." But it took hours and hours. I was so nervous, and we set it up, and it went off just so perfect. It scared the hell out of me to jump off that thing. No. He ended up with, I think, a broken collarbone. I think he broke his wrist and an ankle, and he was hurt for several months. But he was so excited about that project, and we worked hard to try to get this thing. But the problem with all these projects that we were doing for the airlines and the military is all that paperwork to get them approved by the FAA and all that. It was taking years to get that all approved to where they could use that equipment. And so it was good technology, but we just didn't put the whole plan together on how we were actually going to make money for us right away. So anyway, we got to, working on these survival boats, and then the Ford family from San Francisco, the father that was financing Maravia, Bob Ford, was a very wealthy man. He made all of his money in Venezuela in the oil industry. He was an oil engineer. And he had done some pretty fantastic stuff of his own, figuring out how to cap oil once they came out of the ground. And I don't know a lot about that part of it, but he was a very wealthy man. And so his deal was, he was very involved with the St. Francis Yacht Club. He was actually the Commodore of the St. Francis Yacht Club. Yeah, and they had 3 of the biggest sailboats out there, and so he was saying, hey, everybody here needs these little inflatable yacht tenders. So that's what we started building. We started building these little 8 to 11 foot little yacht tenders, and they looked really good. The patterns were really nice. Gordon knew a little bit about that stuff, and he had brought in a friend of his, a gentleman that was every bit as old as Gordon, a guy by the name of Ivan Swickard. And Ivan was a sheet metal design pattern drafter. So he was doing stuff like designing the big tanks and shapes for like cement trucks and just lots of weird projects, but very, very talented, very, very good in math, and could lay out all these patterns. So we figured out, and the patterns for these yacht tenders were pretty basic. No lift, they were just pointed on one end, kind of squared off in the stern. And some people wanted them packed on their sailboats, some people wanted them inflated all the time. So that project went good for a few years, and we were getting a lot of boats out there just because the Fords were so connected with the yachting industry. And that carried us for a few years, but we were getting asked to make inflatable boats for Whitewater, and none of us knew a thing about Whitewater. Gordon Holcomb had built some patterns for 18-foot boats, what he called the Havasu. And that boat, we pulled all them old patterns out and we played with them, and everything was hand glued up back then. And it was quite the project. It was a very, very slow and tedious project to do that. You know, you'd glue a little bit, you'd lay the pieces together, and then you would have to wait for that to cure overnight before you could really do much with it, before you could bend it much and put it up on air or anything. So the whole process was very, very slow, but we got it, and we started getting some boats built. And Gordon knew another gentleman by the name of Vladimir Kovalak that had been, I don't know, he was in the military with Gordon, and he would come around and hang around our shop all the time. Well, some of them old patterns that we weren't happy with, we were tearing them up and throwing them in our garbage. Well, Vladimir climbed in there, and he took some of them patterns, and he went over to Japan, to Okamoto Rubber, and they started building that particular boat, and they even called it the Havasu. And that turned out the company, they named themselves Campways. So that was the original piece of Campways. Well, Campways started building boats, and by then we were struggling trying to keep up with everybody. And there was, when we would do a trade show back then, the trade show would consist of an Avon boat, a Maravia boat, and a Campways boat. And then there was one woman with a kayak, Ann Dwyer, and she called it the Kiwi. And this Kiwi kayak was not really a whitewater boat. It had a very big open cockpit and stuff, but a nice boat. And but that was the whole trade show back then. So it was in its early stages. It was, and people loved to come to them shows to see that equipment. So. But we didn't have much to show, and neither did everybody else. Avon had, I think, a Pro and maybe one other, a Scout or something. Riken had, not Riken, Campways had 1 or 2 boats. Well, somewhere along the line, Campways decided they were getting, I think they had a lot of help from Andy and Bax and them guys like that, but they had decided to get into a lot of gear and create like a retail store. Well, one of their first pieces that they built besides inflatables was they came out with this tent that was just a 2-person, 3-person little pop-up tent. And then things went like wildfire. They just sold the living heck out of them, and all of a sudden Campways was on the map. And that went well for them for several years, and boy, they were introducing little tiny bits and pieces of not only whitewater, but just camping equipment, and all very inexpensive, and you know, camp cookware, and you guys probably remember a lot of it, but it was fun, and we were struggling with a few other boats, and one of the things we did, we didn't know anything about marketing Whitewater or anything with doing inflatables. So, and like I said, the Fords had plenty of sailboats and stuff. So one day we decided we were going to do a photo shoot. Well, we go out into San Francisco Bay, and we get out there and we inflate a boat that we had built. And this was our 14-foot Willowa, and back then they were not self-bailers, they were all standard Florida boats. So they threw that boat over the side of that sailboat, and we're out there, and we're just, with a little wooden frame we put together and everything, we're rowing that thing around, and they're taking pictures and everything. And so they finally said, George, get in there and make it look like you know what you're doing with it. And I had no clue what I was doing, but we were out there long enough that all of a sudden the wind came up, and I'm thinking, oh man, this is going to be tough to get this boat back onto that sailboat. And I'm down here, and the sailboat's up here. The next thing, it's the reverse of that, and it gets way too windy and too rough. So the decision is made that you're just going to have to go in and ride it into the shore. It's no big deal. We can only take the sailboats in so far. And so I'm thinking, well, I think I know how to row this thing forward in one straight line, and it would probably look like hell trying to get back over there. But we weren't that far off the shore. They were able to follow me up pretty close, but the keel on that boat hung pretty low. These were big. Their sailboat was 52 foot, and the medium-sized one that we had out there that day. And so at a certain point, they said, just go for it, take it into the shore. Well, I could see that surf, and I'm going, well, what do you do when you get into that? So I'm sitting there going, oh man, this does not look good. I have no idea what I'm doing. And so I'm rowing up to it, and then I'd back off a little bit, and I'd row up to it, and I'd back off, and it's sucking me closer and closer. And finally it got up to the point where there was it was the point of no return. I'm going in no matter what. And by then you get a bunch of people on the beach. We're right in front of the aquarium in San Francisco. And so millions of people out there eating lunch and all that. And there's a couple people that jump up and they're thinking, this guy looks like he's in trouble. And so I'm coming in pretty good, coming in hot. And it's not looking good, and the surf is pretty big, and I haven't a clue what to do or how to handle that. And so there's a guy waving me in, just like, you got it, come on, come on. And I start rowing, and he starts screaming, row hard, and I start rowing, and man, the next thing I know is I let go of them oars, and I just climb up in the front of it, and I'm doing like, ah! And I rode that whole thing in, and it hit that surf, and it just turned upside down and threw me, and this guy grabbed that boat and about pulled his hand off. And everybody's cheering me on and stuff, but that was our introduction to what you would do with a whitewater raft. And that stuff went on for many more years. We still didn't learn our lesson and stuff, so we had many, many stories like that. But it was funner than heck. And so little by little, we started coming out with more and more models of boats. And so the yacht tenders were good, but people wanted to leave them inflated on top of their decks of their sailboats. And we started realizing, wow, we've got some issues with this adhesive. As soon as they get pretty hot and they sit up there for days, some of that adhesive gets soft, and we couldn't figure it out. Well, the company that was building the fabric for us out of Ohio, they said, oh, we got this new adhesive, this new cement, 2-part, and PM 107, all this stuff is the bomb. Well, we went on and built many different boats with that, and that probably ended up darn near killing Maravia. We probably ended up with $1.5 million worth of warranty repair work. The bank said, shut it down, walk away now, and we were like, no, we're going to try to fix it. So it probably took us 5 years to straighten all that out, but we did. We stood with it, we took care of it, and got beat up over it for years and years to come. But hung in there, and then let's see. Well, about 1975, we started trying to build boats. We were calling them self-bailer, but they were just a big tube boat without a floor in them. And that worked okay as long as you didn't put any weight in it. And we thought we were the bomb with that. I mean, them boats, they looked good, and we were just lacing big decks in them, and people were stacking them full of gear, and they said, but you can't put any weight in them. So somewhere along the line in there, all in this, the beginning, we also had created a sewing department in our business. And the first employees of Maravia, as we started taking people on, we moved it up to about 23 employees within a few years. And we had 23 Portuguese women, all from the same area in Terceira, Portugal, that came to work for us, that were here in America. Their husbands all worked at the steel factory. I think I'm boring everybody. Someone's trying to go sleep on me. I actually appreciate that, my friend. It gave me a chance to catch my breath. But that was in California. Our shop was in San Leandro, California, and there was a twin shop that was a building next door to us, and next door to us they built them little round sugar candies, Necco candy, and then the Valentine Hearts candies. And so they were our neighbors. We hung out with them guys, and we had all that we wanted to eat and then some. And we made them lots and lots of tarps and stuff. So, in there we had all these women that were hand gluing all these pieces of fabric together for us, and we were all learning this thing at the same time. Our one product that Gordon had developed himself and really hadn't put it into production though was a Class 5 life jacket that we started building, and that was almost from the get-go. That was probably a couple years into the beginning of Maravia, and that was an orange mesh life jacket with a really good foam, and that life jacket, it took over the industry for many years. That life jacket of ours was the #1 life jacket for many, many years. And but again, as all them life jackets and stuff, there was many other companies getting into that business, Stearns and a whole bunch of other people, and so we could see that disappearing too. And we knew from early on that the gluing of boats was never going to be a viable piece. It was going to have to be, we were going to have to speed the process up. There was just way too much labor involved. And so we, I think that was in about, let me see here. So I think it was about 88 or so. We found these guys that were, they were supposedly a son, the dad and the son were building these hot air welders that could fuse this vinyl and urethane fabric together. So we went out again to Ohio to meet these guys, and we took a bunch of cut patterns that we were hand gluing, and we went out there, and it didn't go real smooth, but we realized that we were onto something and they were going to tweak their machine. So we bought the very, very first Miller welder from their garage. It was the son and the dad building them right in their garage, and it was the Miller 101. It was the very first machine sold. And so we brought that back, and they came out to California several times, helped us get that thing off the ground, made a bunch of changes on it, and boy, that really started to speed up the process. And things were moving then. We were on to something then. And right behind that, we started, we met these people out there that in Virginia that were, they were spraying this urethane, and we were looking for, we had always been putting like a 30 mil unsupported vinyl onto the bottom of boats and on the top for chafer, for wear resistance. Well, we went out to see these guys, me and Doug Timms, and we watched these guys, and they were spraying in a room as big as this, these buoys for the ocean that were, oh, they were probably 15 foot tall and probably a diameter of, you know, I don't know, maybe about 15 foot in diameter, and kind of a bullet shape on both ends. And these things were big buoys for the ocean, for big ocean ships and stuff to be buoyed up against. And then they would, once they molded this foam, they had this big, almost like a lathe with a big pipe, and then they had this foam cut in 3 or 4 inch strips, and they would spray glue on it, and they would run this foam down and just layer it on there. And then they had figured out a way to just take and carve that foam with almost like a router thing, and they could just walk it down and carve this foam into this shape. Well, then they were spraying it with this urethane. Well, they were the same company that made the urethane. So it became a good piece for them to sell their own product to themselves. So these big buoys, they were putting this urethane on 2 or 3 inches thick. And then they were wrapping them with chains, crisscrossing them, and then there was a big old tire that they had drilled holes through, and then the chains ran through the tires. So these things were beefy, and they weighed thousands and thousands of pounds, but they'd set them out in the ocean. So they had invited us up there to take a look at the urethane. They were looking for customers, and so we went up there to look, and they did, incredible amount of testing for us to get that stuff to bond to our fabric. And so we went back to the people that were manufacturing the fabric, and they said, you need to do this, it needs to have these kind of properties and stuff. And we figured out a way to get their urethane to bond to our fabric. So then we came back, and I started collecting a bunch of parts and trying to figure out, because their whole deal is, they said, as long as this thing is moving, we can spray that urethane on as thick as you can imagine, and it won't slump, it won't, sag. As long as it's moving at a certain rate, because it would cure at a pretty good rate, And so I figured I could come back home and try to figure out, once we had a shell of a boat, and how we would turn that boat and then spray this urethane on. And so the first ones, we were trying to mop that urethane on with just big brushes and stuff, and we were like, that ain't gonna work, we'll never be able to build it up. And so out here, and it wasn't in this shop, it was the one across the street that we originally had that building. I hooked a big chain around one of the big red iron posts, like these here, and I ran it out, and I took a big old metal bar, and we hooked it to one D-ring on each side of the front of the boat. And then I took a bunch of 2x10s and 2x8s, and I built this big stand, went down to Granger and bought a motor with a gear reducer, and had a guy that knew a little bit about how you reduce the speed, and he stuck a chain on it, and we put a rheostat on it so that we could control how fast that thing was turning. It was very, very crude. And I remember going to the junkyard and buying an old Volkswagen axle or something, and we rigged that up in order to attach the back of the boat. And then we pull this whole thing back, and then we could turn that boat. And so once we did that, we took big sheets of visqueen and we lined them up in one of the bays. And we met these guys up here on Orchard, Robert Taylor and Sons, and they were building all these car washes. And their whole deal was they knew pumps. And not only did they know pumps for car washing mostly, but also for painting. And they had a guy in there that he had helped build a bunch of paint booths where they were painting airplanes. And so these big airplanes, and so he was fascinated with what we were trying to do, and he came down and said, I think I could fix you up. So they lent us a big pump, and a big Graco pump, and we went in there and we figured out how to thin down the urethane enough to get it to spray. And I mean, we were just burning up material and just going through this stuff, trying to figure it all out. So it didn't go fast, but we were probably a year into it before we finally got a boat to turn and we were able to spray one. Once we sprayed a boat, then we would let it turn in there until it was cured enough where you could leave a good fingerprint or ruin the coating on it if you touched it. But then we would get 5 or 6 of us and we would lift it and hold it, and then we would try to carry it. And we had big straps hanging from the ceiling, and we would strap it up to the ceiling and let it hang there overnight. But we did this for another year. And then in 1989, I convinced my partners at Maravia here that we were going to take and build us a paint booth. And so we decided that we needed to be able to do 6 boats at a time. And we started building this paint booth with all the employees out in the shop. Not a one of us knew how to swing a hammer. And, but we got it up, and then I called the fire marshal to take a look and said, what's it going to take to have you guys approve this? And he came in and panicked, and he said, don't you dare ever turn a pump on that thing. You'll burn this place down in a heartbeat. And so they made us put metal up in the ceiling and all that, and we were able to turn the first boat. And we started spraying these boats, and little by little we refined it, and then eventually we moved over to this building, and built the paint booth that's out here now with the help of the Yankee machine shop out there on Federal Way. I just realized I missed the big piece in California. Yeah, but anyway, so we were well on our way with spraying boats by then. And the original boats, we hadn't figured out how to completely weld them. So all the miters were being welded together, but we couldn't figure out how to close them, how to do the bulkheads and all that. So a lot of that was still hand glued. So we went through quite a few years of them boats where part of it was welded, part of it was hand glued, and still very labor intensive. But we were refining it, and yeah, it went well. I kind of want to go back to that part of California. We were there from 72 till 85. And them Portuguese women, man, they worked so hard. We had just such a great team. And them women, they just loved working there. And but they were all like family. And so we started having these really nice lunches. So then at a certain point we said, you know, we got to set aside a little spot here where we could have a place where everybody could set their food they bring in, and we'll all come over and have a lunch together every day. Well, little by little, we built the whole kitchen, refrigerator, stove, and the whole works. Well, then it turned into every single day, 5 days a week, we had a sit-down lunch with 25, 26 of us. And the Ford family came in and helped finance a lot of that, and man, it was just funner than heck. So when we eventually we moved the business from San Leandro to the other side of the bay, across the Bay Bridge, and that them women were like devastated, and they were like, well, wait a minute, how do we get over there? And we're like, well, you know, you're more than welcome to come, but it's 30-something, 40 miles away, and you know, you had to cross over the bridge. And so they were hell-bent to figure out a way to still work for Maravia. So what I did was I hooked up with the state of California, and we got one of them commuter vans. They were starting that program with the rideshare, the 15-passenger vans. Well, the state of California was more than happy to pretty much put us together that program, and they said, you got spots for 15 people. Well, then I had to figure out who's going to drive this thing. And so for about the first 2 years, I drove them. And but we also had a great time with that on the way from San Leandro to the North Bay in San Rafael. Certain days of the month we'd stop in Alameda, we'd go out on the rocks out there, and we would collect all these mussels. Well, then we'd take them back to our shop in 5-gallon buckets, and we'd clean them out, and they'd run. And then we'd have all these incredible meals with all these mussels, and everybody was making some kind of a baked dish. But really, them women were the backbone of Maravia in the early days. So come about 85, Bob Ford, the father, he seen that his sons were, one of them was hanging out at the yacht club quite a bit. He wasn't really putting much work in it. That was Dick Ford. Chris Pearson had left us. Gordon Holcomb had passed away. He was up into, I think he was close to 80 by then. But he, so Dick Ford's brother, Phil Ford, came on board and was helping us. But Phil Ford was a great guy, but heavy drinker, and couldn't be depended on to be there. So the dad came to me and said, we're going to pull the plug on the whole thing, George. I'm just not liking what my sons are not involved, and you're carrying the whole load, and you're doing a great job, but it just can't go on like this, and it's just not moving anywhere. So toward the end of our stay there in California, we had some customers from Idaho here, Doug Timms and Mike McLeod, and they had bought several boats. And Doug was from Cleveland, Mississippi, and Mike was an Idaho native. And Doug had bought a river permit from Steve Curry. I think it was Steve Curry's Middle Fork business. And he brought the boats down to be repaired and worked on. I took Doug to lunch one day, and he was like, yeah, you know, it's really tough. I'm gonna lose this young guy. I really like him. He's a great boater, and you know, he could lead these groups like no tomorrow. And but he says, but he wants to get married, and I think he's gonna leave me because his wife is not gonna put up with this working just part of the year, and the ski industry isn't enough for him to be in also. So I told him, hey, you know, you ought to take a look into buying Maravia. Well, he did. And the three of us brought it to Idaho on Thanksgiving Day in 1985. Biggest snowstorm you ever seen. So when we got to Idaho and we set up our shop, it was in the building down on the other end of the parking lot there. And we had lots of people coming in looking at what we were doing. One of our customers that came in and looked all the time was a guy by the name of Jim Baugh. I don't know, a few of you guys probably know who he is. And he looked all the time, and he was asking lots of questions, and so he finally said, hey, I'm going to need a boat for this race that goes on in the Boise River. I think it was for the Epilepsy League or something. Super float. Well, so I lent him the boat, and that son of a gun went out there and won it, I think.
I don't know with that Kevlar boat.
Yeah, so there was a lot of innovations we were doing. We were playing around with Kevlar, which was they were building bulletproof vests with that, and it was incredibly strong, ultra light, but very, very difficult to put a coating on it that would bond to that fabric. And so had its own issues, and we worked with that for many, many years. But JB came in, and so then he needed a boat for river rafting with his friends. Well, I think this went on as he was borrowing boats for a good 3 or 4 years. But I don't want to complain, because this son of a gun finally came through and started buying boats and brought all his friends with him. So we greatly appreciate that, and he brought a good crowd with him. So, but along the way, you know, we did many things. We took on Cascade Outfitters was in it was in Eugene, Oregon, and Cascade was it was up there with NRS and Andy and Bax. They were doing retail sales, but the guy that originally owned it was Ron Matson, and then Ron was selling the business, and a guy by the name of oh God. I'll think of his name here in a minute, but another fellow bought it, and he ran it for years, and their premier boat that they were selling, their top of the line boat, was a Maravia, and they pushed it good. We all hung out, we did lots of great rivers together, and had a great time. But then at a certain point, Jack Nelson wanted to retire, and so we thought about it. We decided we were going to go up there and purchase that business, and so that we had an avenue still to sell our boats. And so we went up there and took a look at it, and ended up buying the whole thing and brought it down here, and that was the start of Cascade Outfitters here. And it all went very good. We brought a few of their employees with them. A girl, Cammie, that took care of all their books, and Gary Stott, another guy that was an incredible boater, a great athlete, and he managed the store for several years. And then we had several different managers throughout that time. You guys probably know, like Eric Strubar. I think Eric was at one time managing Cascade, and a bunch of people. But it was a great move for us, and now it's Cascade Gear, and they're sitting right in it. So, we, you know, and there was another point in here in the early days where we bought a kayak company that were making inflatable IKs out of Grants Pass, Oregon, and the two guys that had that business was Greg Gramp and Tim Schultz. And them two gentlemen stayed with us for about a year, and then left us, and they started a company called Air. And they've done very, very well, and we're all still really great friends. And so it's been fun to have been part of all of that, and to see the industry grow. And for me, man, what a ride I've had. I mean, we did several pieces in different movies. The first piece we did, we built that little yellow inflatable lifeboat for the very first Indiana Jones, where they fell out of the airplane, and that was us. We made that boat, and that boat we made several different sections, pieces, but that's how they did it in the movies. And then the next thing in San Rafael in Marin County, where our shop was before we came to Idaho, there was a fiberglass shop next to us, and they were building these Lancer sailboats, a little micro Lancer that was a replica of the 6-meter race boat. But these were like a one-person boat. You just cram yourself in and you sail it around. They were way cool, and they sold lots of them. But they were tied into the movie industry, and so they were doing stuff for. They built the big cauldron and the big ball that chased them down in the Indiana Jones movie, and we did other movies. Early days when we were still in California, we worked on a movie called The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper. He was a guy that jumped out of an airplane when stole a bunch of money, and a gentleman that I got to hang with for a good month was a guy by the name of Treat Williams. And Treat Williams, at that point, was not even an actor. He was a stuntman, trying his hardest to just make it into the movies and be an actor. He just passed a couple years ago. So, but that was a fun deal. And then we went on to do all the boats for the River Wildwood, Meryl Streep, Kevin Bacon, John C. Reilly. That was funner than heck. And yeah, it was a great time. We had one other thing that we did that we really had a great year that one year. We had a gentleman that walked in and he said, I want 90 boats. I want them all to be exactly the same. I want them all stock. We decided on a 14-foot boat, a Willowa 1. They were all plain. They didn't even want them encapsulated. We said, what are you doing with 90 boats? He says, I'm creating this world's toughest race called the Eco Challenge. And so we worked with this guy for several months, and we built all these boats. Well, they put about half the money, maybe a little bit more of that up, and we built all them boats, and then they took delivery of them, and we worked out a deal that, okay, yeah, everything's cool, you know, just keep paying us on them. And but then we started noticing, the payments are getting smaller and slower, and we were getting nervous. So I called him and I said, hey, Mark, you know, we're making us a little nervous on our end here. We got to get paid for them. And he said, how about if I do this? We're struggling with this thing, George. We're trying hard to get this thing off the ground. And so how about if I bring all 90 of them boats? Most of them hadn't even been out of the box yet. I'll bring them back. You store them. Give me a year to pay for them. If I don't, you keep the whole batch, and we're even on what I paid for them now. We took him back. He never paid for them. His company went bankrupt on the Eco Challenge, which turned out to be the best year of our life because we had 90 boats that had almost been paid for, and then we sold them again. The funny thing is, this gentleman, he walked away from the Eco Challenge, and his next project was Survivor. That's Mark Burnett. And he went on to do The Apprentice, but he created reality TV. So, I mean, it's funny to think about, you know, we were this close to the big money. But he did very, very well, and that was quite the phenomenon that he created with Survivor and everything else that he touched. And still to this day, I think he's involved with quite a bit of stuff like that. As far as accomplishments for Maravia, our early days, when we, all of our thwarts were made with bladders too. And when Greg Ramp and Tim, and I have no idea if this had anything to do with how they came up with a bladder system, but fighting a little bit of a cold here. No, I'm good. But Greg, he was very interested in that whole system that we were using to build a thwart with a bladder. And we were slowly but surely trying to move into the whole welded system. And like I said, he moved on and created air, and they made the whole bladder system work. And it's a great system, and super proud of what he did with it and how big he took that thing. So fun, and
Maravia's better.
So it's been an incredible ride for me. I've enjoyed every bit of it. I met my girlfriend Nancy on my second river trip in Chile. Her group of friends went down there to run a trip with Steve Curry. They were all boaters from the Salt Lake City area. And I don't know what year was that, 87, 88 or something? 88. So I had went down in 85, and right when we got here to Idaho, and told Doug and Mike, hey, I got invited to come down to Chile, and I'm gonna help get them boats in shape for their river season, and I'll be down there for a month. I don't know, I'm not sure that went over real well, but I went, and went down there and got to run the river, and just had the greatest time of my life. Well, then I got a chance, and we ran that thing at some really, really huge water. And we got to the biggest rapid, Lava South, I think it was El Salto or something like that, but it was a massive rapid. And the day we weren't quite to it. We were still about 3 miles away from the rapid. And it's a hell of an entrance in there. It's a big rock garden of gigantic boulders and big, big water in itself just to get to it. But, and the water had been the biggest they had ever seen it. And we get down there, and we pull in and we set up a camp. And he says, too late in the day, we're gonna stay here. The rain's too hard. It's just too dark. Let's just get up early in the morning, we'll run it. And so we're making all of our plans how we got to do it. Here comes another river trip. It's Richard Bangs and Sobek. And they crowd into our camp. And there was already a big feud with the two, because they were always feuding over who had actually pioneered and run the first descent of the Rio Biobío. And so there was no love lost between Steve Curry and Richard Bangs and stuff. And so they were arguing over letting him stay at the camp and everything. And it was like, there is no other camp before that. It's too late. We're not running it. And so they crammed in there. Well, our plan was to get up extremely early in the dark, jump in our boats, and just kind of try to rig them as we're going down some pretty treacherous rapids as it is, and get down there and just run it and not have them tagging on us. And that's what we did. And so we were running these big 22-foot Maravias. This is still in the days when we had wooden dry boxes, wooden frames on these boats. And so it was quite the adventure. We get up there, and I'll tell you, if I had a chance to see it before I ever got there, I'd have walked around that son of a gun. But we ran it, and we made it. They were incredible boaters, these guys, and they had. So for years I did many Maine salmon and Middle Fork trips with those guys, and I ran their baggage boat for many, many years, and which turned out to be fun. They would never let passengers ride with me. I'm not sure it was my boating skills or it was just that they were like, no, you're not really even an employee, but it didn't matter. So the year when Nancy and them guys came down there, we got down there again. Steve Curry trip, and Steve Curry wasn't on that trip, but he had guides that were running it, and all of their friends, all of Nancy and her friends, they were all good boaters from Utah area. Well, they had already made arrangements with Steve Curry that they said, we want to run these boats. We want you to guide us down there and everything, but we want to be able to run these boats down through the rapids. Well, one guy, George Urich, on the trip, he was some kind of engineer for like Morton Thiokol or something like that. But he had made up this whole spreadsheet and everything. You get to run this many miles, you get to run this section, you get to do this. Well, the moment he got it, and none of them guys had ever been in a boat that big and then loaded that hard. And so the moment he got in it, I don't think he went a football field's length before he tipped that thing over, and we were chasing gear for him, and it was ugly. So that was the last time he climbed in that boat. But it was a great trip. I made friends with Nancy and all of her friends. Nancy, I think, had been through, had just finished up a divorce, and I was still married. And we were just good friends. Many, many years later, Nancy was bringing her business up to Idaho from Salt Lake, and she brought an occupational therapy business up here and was partnered up with some gentleman that was, I don't know, he was a psychologist. But there was issues from the very, very beginning. He started publishing her work. And so we were just friends at the time. I said, you need to get legal help and stuff, and she did. And that was the end of that business. And then she worked around the valley at several other different clinics. And the final piece of her career, she helped start and put together Northwest Neurobehavioral Health, which is now the single largest children's neuropsych, am I correct, treatment evaluation center, aside of St. Luke's. And so, then when they decided to buy a building, and none of them really had money, and they looked at Nancy and said, you know, you will be online for all of this. And she's like, I'm out. Sold her piece of it and got out and retired to take care of her mom. So, but we've rafted all over. We've got a question in the back there.
Well, what about the part where you forgot your kid?
The who?
You forgot your kid.
My tent.
It's a great story. What happened to me?
Yeah, JP, that's all right. There was, we're moving on because that nothing happened there. We were just good friends, and anyway. I have had the greatest ride of anybody, I think, and my life has been so blessed. Thank you so very much. Ted Day have done this incredible job with the SOTAR people. I know down there, them guys loved him and still do, and oh my God, we felt threatened. So thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, George.
Thank you so very much.